The British have never felt a particularly pressing need formally to define science. In 1843, Parliament passed the Scientific Societies Act, which exempted from the payment of rates all societies established exclusively for purposes of science, literature, or the fine arts. The Act has remained on the statute book ever since, but in spite of its age, there hasn't been a single case in a British law that has sought to define science for the purposes of the Act. Its redundancy has not been complete. In 1999, the High Court in Ireland heard a case between the Transport Museum Society of Ireland and Registrar of Friendly Societies concerning a lower court's refusal to grant the former the benefit of a certificate under the 1843 Act. The court was required to determine whether the Transport Museum Society was indeed engaged in the practice of science for the purposes of the Act. In doing so, it took a broad interpretation of what science was. Referring to an earlier judgment from Lord Denning, the court claimed that science included not only pure or abstract science, such as pure mathematics, but also applied sciences, such as electricity or engineering, and that the purposes of science meant not only the advancement of knowledge by research work, but also the dissemination of it by lectures or teaching or writing. In effect, taking its cue from the Act's full phrase, science, literature, or the fine arts, the court ruled that science should be interpreted in line with its historic and etymological roots, of knowledge in the widest sense, and not in the narrow academic sense as covering mathematics, chemistry, physics, and biology alone. Science, in other words, was a capacious category. The situation in America has been somewhat different. On account of the prevalence of what is called creation science, the need formally to define science in US law has been more urgent and less instinctively generous. When, in 1981, the governor of Arkansas signed into law an act that mandated that public schools in the state shall give balanced treatment to creation science and to evolution science, the inevitable ensuing trial, resulting in the so-called Overton judgment, paid particular attention to the question of what constituted science. Unlike in Ireland, where the rateable status of the Transport Museum in Howth was at stake, in Arkansas it was the somewhat more vexed issue of children's education. All the evidence suggests that the general direction of travel, legally and culturally, in the US, UK, and Europe, is towards Overton rather than Howth, namely, the need to define science and to do so with greater precision and constraint.